Welcome back to Breaking History, the Supreme Court Historical Society's show where we highlight modern scholarship about the Supreme Court's endlessly interesting past. I'm Ross Davies, and today I am joined by Clare Cushman. Clare is the Director of Publications here at the Society and also a prolific author and editor of Supreme Court scholarship, including such books as Supreme Court Decisions and Women's Rights, Milestones to Equality, and Court Watchers, Eyewitness Accounts in Supreme Court History, and, most recently, Table for Nine, Supreme Court Food and Recipes. Now, that's what I'd call range in Supreme Court scholarship. Today, we're here to talk about two of Clare's most interesting recent editorial projects for the Society, which happened to come to fruition almost simultaneously, and thus ended up appearing side by side as articles in the most recent issue of the Society's flagship publication, the Journal of Supreme Court History. The first is Alan Derr's memoir of his work on the case that culminated in the court's 1971 decision in Reed versus Reed, a case that may not be widely known today, but which surely touches most American households, as Clare will explain in a moment. The second is Catherine Ladnier's collection of interviews about the court's 1966 decision in Miranda versus Arizona, a case that everybody knows about today. But these interviews, well, as Clare will again explain in a moment, they are truly extraordinary. And now to Clare, who will tell us about these extraordinary Supreme Court stories and how she shepherded them into print. Clare, might we start by getting to know just a little bit the two people behind these stories of two great Supreme Court cases? Who are Alan Derr and Clare Ladnier?
Thank you, Ross. So Alan Derr was a Boise, Idaho attorney. He had a small practice with his brother Jack and one associate. He had been in the Marines in World War II, and he went to University of Idaho Law School. And one day, Sally Reed, who is the plaintiff, the first time the Supreme Court ruled that a law was discriminatory on the basis of sex, Sally Reed walked into Alan Derr's office in Boise and asked him to take up her case. It's a very fascinating story how Derr, small-time lawyer, takes it on pro bono and argues it all the way up to the Supreme Court. So how did his memoir come to me or to us at the Supreme Court Historical Society? It's an interesting tale. It involves his friend and neighbor, a man named Richard Alman, who was a journalist for the Christian Science Monitor. And he and his wife, Janet, took down Derr's thoughts and crafted it into a memoir. They typed it out, and then their niece, a woman named Shauna Harvey, found it after they had passed away and decided that somebody needed to publish it. And so she called us, and I took the call and I said, yes, indeed.
Well, I must say, Clare, we planned on talking about both of these, but I feel like I want to know more about Alan Derr and Sally Reed and their story first. So please carry on.
So as I said, Reed versus Reed was the first sex discrimination case that the court upheld. And it involved a probate law in Idaho that said that when a minor dies intestate, it is the father, not the mother, who has the right to administer the estate. Or I should really say it preferred males over females. And the reason for this was basically administrative convenience. It was expensive to go through the courts to make that decision. And this was premised on, of course, underlying pernicious stereotypes that men were more involved in the public sphere and women were more involved in the private sphere at home, so men would be more competent. And Sally decided this was not fair. Her son Skip had died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound when he was visiting his father. They were divorced and they had joint custody, and Skip was there on a weekend visit. And Sally was mad. She said, why don't I have the right to administer his estate? There wasn't much involved. Skip was a very talented musician. He had a bunch of musical instruments. He had about $600 in his bank account. So Sally asked around in Idaho, and through a series of events, which Derr explains in his memoir, she got the name of Alan Derr. And this opening scene of this memoir is kind of like a Raymond Chandler, mystery novel. It's like she walked into my office. There was a woman in the sitting room, a 59-year-old female. Alan Derr was in his 40s, and history was made.
And so she's not looking for a Maltese Falcon. She's looking for some justice for a woman, for some equal treatment for a woman,
Exactly.
which is a more noble pursuit. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yeah, she was angry. She said, "Why shouldn't it be me?" I mean, I think she was taking care of Skip, and Cecil had gone on. Her husband's name was Cecil, had gone on and remarried. Um, so Derr took on the case pro bono. He paid the filing fees all the way up to the Supreme Court. The district judge ruled in favor of Sally, and then the Idaho Supreme Court ruled in favor of Cecil. So it was kind of some financial hardship to Derr to pursue this case. When he applied to the Supreme Court, and it was accepted, a lot of outside groups got interested in helping. National Organization for Women. There were a whole host of amicus groups that were involved, but the most important, of course, was the ACLU. And they put together the briefs, or I should say, Ruth Bader Ginsburg put together the briefs. In Derr's words, she assembled the amicus briefs, but he doesn't quite give her the credit I think he should in his memoir. He does say that she was extremely helpful. He was incredibly grateful to her, but really she drafted the brief based on her ideas about sex discrimination and how to eradicate it, which were also based on Dorothy Kenyon's earlier sort of intellectual work. But they became friends, Derr and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and became, or actually lifelong friends. So it was an amicable relationship. I must say that at the time, Ginsburg was a professor at Rutgers, at Rutgers Law School. So then this memoir keeps you on your toes because you want to know what happens next. I mean, it's the whole story about how does Derr get there from Idaho, and how does he prepare for oral argument? And I mean, he was a small town lawyer. Mel Wolfe, who was the head of the ACLU Women's Project, wanted him off. He wanted an experienced, a seasoned, Supreme Court appellate lawyer. He actually had Eleanor Holmes Norton in mind to argue it. And so there was some contention there. But Sally Reed stuck with Alan Derr. She said, "He's my man. He took my case when nobody else was interested." One thing that I learned in this memoir, that I've read a lot about the Reed case, and I worked with Justice Ginsburg on a book on Supreme Court decisions and women's rights. And I was fascinated to hear that Derr was coached by a man named Phineas Indritz, who you might know, but I really sadly had not heard enough about. He was a civil rights lawyer with a lot of Supreme Court experience, and he coached Derr. He coached him for the argument. He had been before the court, and that was extremely valuable to Derr. So, as I said, the memoir goes step by step through all the thrilling moments of Derr walking up the steps and facing the justices in the courtroom, and, his thinking all the way along. And this is why firsthand accounts are so exciting and so valuable. Um, the the thing that is really helpful in the Derr memoir, and I don't know how this happened, if it was Derr or if it was the Almonds, but they take quotes from the from the transcript of the oral argument. And then Derr interjects his thinking as each justice asks a question. And I don't want to give too much away, but it is so fascinating. You feel like you're at the podium with Derr. And just one fun thing that I had not realized was Thurgood Marshall's participation. I mean, he led the opposing counsel, Charles Stout, sort of down the garden path with a series of questions, and then he sort of traps him into being inconsistent. And of course, Derr was delighted by that. So anyway, Derr dies in 2013. Again, the memoirs were recorded by these friends, the Almonds. And I just want to say we need more advocate memoirs, right, Ross?
Oh, absolutely. And these stories are uh, fascinating, not just for the particular case they're about, but what we learn about the way Supreme Court advocacy in the court works. For example, uh, this business of coaching Alan Derr. This happened in the era before the institution of the routine practice of mooting cases came up. Right. This is decades before Georgetown's famous sort of moot court practice came up. Uh, how did this start? Do we have any idea?
No, that's why you and I are making an official call today for memoirs by oral advocates. We know that you have written down things. We know you have diaries. We know you took notes, or maybe you just told your family members and they can remind you what happened that day. But please send it to us and we can help you shape it. I mean, I did help shape this memoir, and I should say that the memoir was a complete autobiography or complete memoir of Derr, and we are only publishing 2 of the chapters, and we might put the rest of it online on our website. So
Wonderful. Yes, this is one aspect. Now, sort of speaking directly to our viewers here for a moment, one aspect of the way the Journal of Supreme Court History has been run by Clare for, I believe now it's fair to say, decades, is being very supportive of people who are not necessarily accustomed to writing for a periodical like this. Sometimes these editorial projects are very collaborative, and the idea is to put forward a strong, complete story of whatever it is that's being addressed. And so the fact that these are oral histories or that these are notes or diaries is no limitation on the potential for a good publication. So with Alan Derr, did he ever make it back to the Supreme Court, or was this sort of a one tremendous sort of a traditional literary one crowded hour of life in the practice of a lawyer who was otherwise working in
yep.
his home?
Yeah, no, he went back to Boise and had a career as a lawyer, but no, he never did any more appellate law. He did a lot of speaking about Reed, and certainly got a lot of kudos for his participation. Um, Sally Reed did not attend the case. I think that was pretty common in that era. A lot of plaintiffs were not either invited or their expenses weren't paid for. Sally did not have much money, so sadly, she was not in the courtroom. But she later came to the court and visited Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who then was, at that point, was a justice, and they had a wonderful time together. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg told her that the Reed case is called, in her mind, or is considered the grandmother of all sex discrimination cases. The first one, the first victory, I should say.
That's wonderful. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but based on what we've heard today and what we can read, in volume 50, number 2 of the Journal of Supreme Court History, 2 of the key players, central players in this case, Sally Reed and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, were not actually in the spotlight on the day the case was argued, because Sally Reed was at home in Idaho.
Mhm. Yeah, Sally was at home in Idaho. I don't know what the practice was in those days of paying expenses for plaintiffs to come. I don't know. I mean, did the ACLU or National Organization for Women or somebody even think about it? It might not have been the custom at the time. I'd love to know more about that. But also, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not at counsel table. She had really prepared the brief, and it seems to me logically that she would have been invited to sit at council table. I'd love to know more about that. There is a biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg coming out next fall, so maybe we'll find out.
Mhm. Intriguing. So, about Carol Ladnier, or Carol Ladnier, I'm sorry, Claire Ladnier,
Catherine. Catherine.
Catherine, Catherine Ladnier.
Mhm.
So, about Catherine Ladnier and her interviews uh, about Miranda, uh, I it, we lack the time, of course, to hear about the details of those interviews.
Mhm.
But can you give us a broad sense of them? For example, who was it that she was interviewing? And what were they talking about?
Well, I mean, I'd like to just give a quick setup about these Miranda interviews because, as exciting as the Derr memoir this is extraordinary. 5 justices discussing a Supreme Court decision 3 years after it's been handed down,
So
and
interviews are with justices of the Supreme Court.
yes,
Mm.
yes, and so we are going to have a separate discussion about all these interviews because they're rich with many different topics, not just about Miranda. We got a call from Catherine Ladnier, and she had been a student at Mills College. She interned for Charles Wiggins, who was her congressman. She had volunteered for him in the summers before he was elected. She worked on his campaign. They were very close. And so she spent time in Washington working on in Congress. And then when she was a senior, her political science professor said, "Gee, wouldn't it be great if you interviewed the Supreme Court justices who ruled on Miranda about their thoughts on the case?" It's such a hot topic because obviously policing was still a hot topic even after the case had come down. And so she asked Congressman Wiggins, and he said, "Sure, I will just write to each of them." And he wrote separate letters to all of the justices who had participated in the Miranda case. Just to go through it, William Brennan said, "No, that's not appropriate. I'm not going to talk to her." Chief Justice Earl Warren, who had stepped down, Warren Burger had replaced him. He said, "I'm just going to be out of town those days. I can't be there." Abe Fortas had stepped down from the court, and we're not really sure why he didn't participate or whether he was asked, but he didn't. But here's who said yes: Hugo Black, William O. Douglas, Tom Clark, who was retired but had been on the case, John Marshall Harlan, Potter Stewart, and Byron White. I should add, though, that Byron White changed his mind. So she interviewed Potter Stewart. He was the first interview. And then when she went to see Justice White, he said, "Wait, you've already talked to Stewart?" And I mean, they were both dissenters. And I think he said, "Well, you've already probably heard everything you need to do. You're wasting my time." So but that still leaves 5 Supreme Court justices talking to her. She asked about 20, 23 questions. They were extremely good questions. Her political science professor, I think, had coached her. Um, she took notes. She brought a friend with her. They took notes. There was no recording device. But she then published these interviews, as her senior thesis. Of course, she got an A. And it sat in the Mills College library all these years. And then Catherine Ladnier one day called the society and said, "Would anybody be interested in seeing this, my senior thesis?" So of course we are. And then we published it. And really what's so extraordinary is that the responses to these questions were so candid, I think partly because she was a 19-year-old woman, and they had sort of let down their guard. But also she didn't ask them about, behind the scenes conference deliberations. It wasn't like, "Give us the inside scoop on Miranda." It was really much more about the fallout from the case, the real world implications from the case. How do you keep up with with the developments in policing and in Congress? I mean, there was a lot of legislation going through Congress about crime. I mean, crime was the big issue at this time period. And so she wanted to know about how the justices sort of, I guess, keep up with outside events, including academic research, how they think about law enforcement procedures once they've finished a case. Are they still taking stock of what's been going on with the results of their decision. But the other thing is, and I'm going to stop.
Fascinating. So the real answer to my question is stay tuned, right? And read up. So we're about out of time. There is, of course, much more that Clare could tell us about Reed v. Reed, about Miranda v. Arizona, about Alan Derr, about Catherine Ladnier. But again, we're about out of time. You can learn more about these stories and others, by the way, by reading the latest issue of the Journal of Supreme Court History, Volume 50, Number 2. And you can subscribe to the journal by becoming a member of the Supreme Court Historical Society at www.supremecourthistory.org. Thank you very much for joining us for this edition of Breaking History. And thank you, Clare. And we will be back soon with another new and interesting look at the past. Thank you.